Hey guys and gals, welcome back to my show, Coffee with Lisa. So excited to have you here.
You know, everything that you do is a reflection of who you are. And everybody talks about what they do. I'm a real estate agent. I sell houses. I do this, or I'm an accountant, and this is what I do. But nobody ever talks about the relationship between who you are and what you do being a function of the innate sense of core principle and conviction that you have. I think that's why people have a really hard time in going out and finding the goals or their finances or whatever they're actually looking for. I think that's why people have a hard time actually finding it, because they haven't defined their core innate sense of conviction and principle and belief. Because, you know, how can you find something if you haven't defined it? And if you attract what you believe and you haven't defined your belief, then how do you expect to attract things? You know, because oftentimes what you're looking for isn't the reality anyway. You know, a lot of people want, you know, financial freedom, but what does that even define? Like, I have less financial stability now than I did when I was making $60,000, $100,000, $150,000 a year. As far as true stability, because you were leveraging those finances as a tool to grow into deeper versions of our potential, to play into our strengths, to maximize our strengths, to go and achieve great things. And so, you know, I thought, man, once I hit, you know, $100,000, like, that's going to be it. And then once I hit 200, and then 300, and then 500, and then once I do $1 million in sales, and then $1 million a month, and then 20 million, and then, you know, once you start hitting all of these different points, it was always the reflection, the forward thought of, man, once you get there. But once you're actually there, you recognize that once I mentality scales in direct proportion to where you're at right now. I would stop thinking about once I get there as far as the immediate goal of monetary reward or stuff or things or recognition, and start thinking about the impact that you can have when you're there, and start chasing the impact and chasing the legacy and chasing the things that you just can't actually physically grasp. That's what's going to be the difference between you and the other people, is when you're chasing those components of your life, the intangible. The intangible is going to be the difference between you and the people that don't achieve that same level of success. Because once you can metaphorically grasp the intangible, then you've made it.
Outstanding. So, for those of you who have not had the pleasure of meeting me, my name is Lisa Patrick, and welcome to the Coffee with Lisa show. I am here with an extraordinary person. This gentleman's name is Evan Stewart, and Evan and I have had the most recent story, if you will, of how we met. And it was really a story of perseverance and action, if you will. And Evan has a conference coming up called the Obsessed Conference. And when I saw it on Facebook, I knew I had to be a part of it in some way, shape, or fashion. And I didn't know Evan. So how was I going to get on that stage? And Evan, you tell the story so well. You're an extraordinary man with an extraordinary mission, and truly believe that being obsessed has not stopped you as a high potential leader. You know, you're an 8-figure closer. You've mastered in the art of business in the real estate world, if you will, and you are taking the world by the storm. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I was delighted when you extended the opportunity, and always enjoy our conversations, Lisa. So I'm really looking forward to bringing value to your audience.
Well, and one of the things I think that you and I share as extraordinary people is our love and commitment of business, but more importantly, of relationships. And
yes,
we're obsessed about it. So if
yes,
you were to define the one value that you bring to a relationship that every single person needs to learn and understand as they commit to their edge learning skills, what would that value be?
You know, from a value standpoint, I have this principle in leaving people better than I found them. And so it's a concept that I've been touching on quite a bit lately, which is an intense drive and focus on our relationship is better because I'm in it, not that you were worse on your own or that you're bad off on your own or anything like that. But when our lives come together, our lives are better due to the fact that we're interacting together. I believe that every individual has on some form or fashion a giftedness, but few people actually play in that realm of magic and giftedness. And so my intense drive, and when we talk about value in relationships, is how does your life, Lisa, become better now that I'm in it? How can we be better together? And really, once we step away from each other, metaphorically or physically, in a certain space, how do I leave you better, so to speak, than I found you? How do we leave the relationship better than we found it together? And I believe that if more people had this kind of service-based mindset on pouring into other people first, then just by default, we'd all be living a little bit happier with a little less friction, that type of thing. So on a conceptual level, that's really what's driving me and driving relationships like this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're connected to some pretty famous people. Matt Monero, for instance. I'd love to hear the story of how you actually got to know Matt Monero. And I mean, he's going to be on your Obsessed platform on the 25th of July in Texas. And so let's talk a little bit more about how values played a key role in actually getting to know Matt.
It's not just Matt. It's anybody of significance. It's on that stage. I've got Judge Graham. I've got Matt. I've got Rocky
Lisa
Garza,
Copeland.
Lisa Copeland. Lisa Copeland's amazing.
Coach Burt. Wow, she does have a great name, Lisa. So I mean, that's a good start.
She's winning there, but just the people that I've started developing a relationship with other people like Tim Story, and I've had instances to start interactions with Grant Cardone and some of these bigger players. And I don't say that to name drop. The reason why I say that is those relationships came through relationships, and so it's just a connection of. I started asking questions to people that I believed were important in my life, that I found significance with. If there's somebody in my life that was doing great things, I started thinking, okay, if you're great, then the people you look up to must be just incredible. And so I started asking questions instead of, let's do something, let's hang out. No, it was, we should spend time together and build a vested relationship. And it was value driven. So that way, every time we interacted, you knew that my only angle was to deepen the relationship. That's the first thing, because it's so hard in genuinity to build through those relationships because everybody has another
agenda,
an angle that they want the relationship. Everybody, exactly, an agenda. They always want to get to something. But that was the first thing, is being value driven. But the second thing was I started asking questions like, Lisa, who's the most important person in your life? How do I make my way to him or her? I started asking questions like, who do you look up to the most in town? Who do you look up to the most out of town? How did you build a relationship with that person? Why? And when you get people starting to talk about other people that have impacted their life and transformed their life, you see this click and this light comes on in their face, and they're excited about it. And the funny thing is, the more that I asked that question, the more I started getting in connection with other people. People are, even the most inaccessible individuals are accessible through relationships. If you can start building vested relationships. And so what happens is we have this web, so to speak, of interpersonal relationships. And you can start going down these lines when you start matching with people that have the same convictions, beliefs, morality, ethical standard, professionalism, drive as you do. And so sometimes you hit walls because like attracts like. I know that, Lisa, if you're a great person, you're going to bring other people that are like you if we refer relationships. But then the people that do believe the same thing, what happens is you start going down the path and then you connect. Then you go down the path and then you connect. Then you go down the path and then you connect. And it's in these connections that you start to build up that relational equity to where eventually when you get to the person that is of a less accessible stance, it's, oh, well, I've heard you, I've seen you here, I've heard you here. I know that you know this person, this person, this person. And so, but starting with those questions over years and years and years has eventually led to compounding relationships to meet amazing men and women that I've been able to interact with and learn from and build relationships with now.
Well, and a commitment to that type of fostering of relationships really is the key to success. And everybody says, well, what is the key to success? The 9 keys to success, so to speak. But I truly, like you, believe the key to success is the genuine relationships that you build when you add value consistently. And we all want to do business together. We all want to make an impact. I mean, that is the end goal all day long, but it's those stepping stones of how you get there that is really how you build a successful business relationships, careers, and so forth. So you're
Absolutely.
right. It's not just one action, it's a sequence of actions, and it's a sequence of
It is.
progress.
It is. It's a diligence, it's an obedience, but to give something tangible and actionable for your audience, when we're talking about adding value, that even is still a little bit ambiguous. And so the way that I define it is in our conversations, I like to pinpoint things in your life that you're working on, that you're
Yeah.
working through, and areas that we can just offer additional support and assistance. Because when you can take those additional steps, that's really when you start to solidify the gap of, okay, you're actually here to bring value. And so, for example, I was had lunch with a friend a couple of weeks ago. He was a new father,
Yeah.
father of three,
Oh,
actually.
wow.
And, and he also was starting a
Like a
business.
new, whoa,
And
wait, stop. He's a new father and a father of three. So he had
yes,
triplets?
not triplets necessarily, but he's got one is a little over a year old, and then he had twins. So
Oh,
um,
gotcha. Gotcha.
yeah, so
Okay.
he's still
Just
very
getting
much in the new.
specific there with those.
Yeah, not triplets, but in the new space. But he was
Yeah.
also starting a business, and it all kind of hit. And you talk to people that are in overwhelm, and you can just tell. And I could
Yeah.
tell. I mean, he just wasn't present. I could tell he wasn't overwhelmed. Amazing man. And so what I did is I went through and I started talking with some of my other business friends, and I sent him a couple of books on entrepreneurship. There's some resources out there for how to manage your life as a business owner and a fathership. How to manage your relationship with your spiritual relationship. He's a Christian man, so him and in Christ, and him and his wife, and him and his family, and him and his business, and gave him some of these resources and got him and his wife a gift card to where they could hire a babysitter and spend some time together, and just kind of delivered that. And it didn't cost much, and it wasn't really a lot of time, but it was the thoughtfulness of, I recognized in his life an area that I
You
could
need,
leave
yeah.
better than I found it.
Yeah.
And so I went out of my way to think of him, and he was so grateful. He called back and just said, I can't, this is so, I mean, he was just blown away. Like
Yeah.
I had just given him a lottery ticket or something, when in reality, nowadays there's so much distraction
Yeah.
around relationships that when you can take a minute and just genuinely think and care for another individual, and then deliver that thought and care in a way that shows that you are authentic, there's no better way to deepen the relationship.
There is none. And, it's not, you weren't being nice, you were being kind. And there's a big
Yes.
difference between being nice and being kind. There's a massive difference between the two of them. And I think
Yes.
there's a lot of talk nowadays about, being your authentic self, being genuine. That's the key to success. But those are words, and not necessarily do words actually inspire the actions that occur.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and like you said, words versus actions. People rarely remember words. People often remember actions. If you think about, we're both in professional development space. So let's think about a conference or a speaker or someone that really impacted you.
Yeah.
There might be a quote or a saying or something, but in reality, when you think back to that moment, your mind isn't initially drawn to the statement. It's drawn to the environment and the experience. So you think to yourself, you put yourself there. Where was I sitting? How was I angled? How was I paying attention? And then it leads you to the speaker, and then it leads you to the words. And so in reality, I believe in the action of kindness and grace and gratitude over the initial just statement, because that is what people remember first. And that brings them back to the statements, the conviction, the belief, the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about your earlier life. So where'd you grow up, and who in your life had the biggest impact on you today?
Absolutely. Well, I am born and raised and still live in Dallas, Texas. So I am a Texas boy here in the United States.
With no draw.
No draw. Actually, it's funny that no draw was from two areas. My mother and my father. My mother was an English major.
Yeah.
And so growing up, it was always very important on how to actually articulate your message, how to speak well, how to get your point across verbally. So communication was extremely important. So the ability to build a vernacular around my emotions and my intentions and actually speak well was extremely important from an early age. But my father, and both my mother and my father were probably some of my biggest influences among others that I'll go into. But my father was a businessman.
Yeah.
And my family has actually been in Texas since generations. They came to this area on a covered wagon. So we're talking a long time. And there was an accent. And my father talks about how he had a little bit of an accent, but as he got further into the business world, unfortunately, one of the stereotypes is that if you have a Southern accent, you can sometimes be considered maybe less intelligent or less just, and I don't like to necessarily reinforce stereotypes, but in the business world, you can sometimes be faced with certain discriminations if you have certain types of accents. So with that being said, that's just the reality. He recognized that and actually dropped his accent. And so when I was growing up, the household was very uniform. A lot of people think that I'm from maybe further north, maybe even northeast, and so that was huge. So there are a couple of times where I might say something and I'll fall into a draw, and it's funny. My wife has a Texas accent a little bit, and her family has a deep Texas accent. They're great people, and you can always tell when we've spent time together because I'll come back and I'll start drawing words. And
it's like going to Scotland and all of a sudden you have this Scottish accent. You've never spoke, in the world of Scottish accents before in your life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But no, it's an amazing area here. I love it here. It's Texas and Dallas specifically. It's one of the best areas for business owners, for minority and women-based businesses. It's one of the top entrepreneurial opportunity areas in the nation. For individuals that are maybe didn't have as much equal opportunity elsewhere in the nation. So really, there's a lot of a relative equal playing field here for people in all industries of all walks of life, and that's really incredible. When we talk about people that influenced my wife, I'm blessed to come from a family that's together. And my mother and my father are together. They're still together, and they really built in through their own ways. My father on his entrepreneurial side, my mother on her craftsmanship of the English language. Them together really impacted my life as I grew up. And from a business standpoint, my great uncle was one of my biggest early mentors early on. I say I've never had a real job. I've worked in retail for a couple of months when I was in high school, but I've never actually done really anything else other than worked for myself. I'm entrepreneurial at heart, self-described as unemployable. and he, my great uncle, he was one of the earliest mentors where we would sit down and we talk about business, and we talk about strategy, and we talk about solutions. And from an early age, it got my mind in this set of what problem do I solve? What service do I provide? Who can I help? How do I start something on my own to actually earn and do more? I've always had the drive to do more, but it was never who can I go and work for? It was always how can I lead? And that really came through mother, father, and my great uncle in my early years, at least.
Wow. So truly an environment of not a fixed mindset, but a growth mindset.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A growth with I always kind of say it was growth within reality.
Yeah.
And that's a funny catch.
That is a good comment.
Because there's two types of growth mindsets. There's what I would call an unrealistic growth mindset. Now, I'm not saying to place limitations on your own dreams. If you're watching this, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that to say I'm going to go from being broke to being a multimillionaire in a year and a half by providing a underwater basket weaving service, that is not necessarily going to happen. The timeline's off, the product's off, the service is off. It was growth in the sense of, okay, you want to go here, but what's the reality to actually get there? The reality of that obedience. And so it was growth in my dreams, my goals were never stifled, but I always think so big and explosive that it would be the reality of, okay, we're big and explosive, but my father, it's going to cost you 3 times as much and usually take 3 times as long as what you initially expected. And I'll be damned if that's not the truth. That type of thing. Truth. And so the reality of, it's exciting, but here's the reality of what we're working with. And then let's combine the two to actually formulate your next steps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the 3 times factor, because that is really the reality. You have to have a product and a service and a deliverable that always adds value. Second of all, that it solves somebody's problem, because if it doesn't solve a problem, it's never going to be valuable to anybody. And
Yes,
thirdly,
correct.
I think you're right. You have to have those systems and processes in place to be
Mhm.
able to get to that next step. And I often hear the quote of, you have to think small to be
Mhm.
big. And I think you
Yes.
have to have small steps in between. You have to have those
Mhm.
milestones in order to actually achieve those big obtainable goals.
Mm.
And if you don't have those milestones, how do you ever get to that level?
Mhm. Well, and I love the fact that you mentioned that because that goes into, again, my mindset is focused on actionable takeaways and
Yeah.
conversations like this. I want your audience to say, that was great. Now I'm going to go to work. Here's one principle that I implemented in my life that changed my life that I strongly recommend maybe your audience considers, which is the concept of earning your sleep. And what I mean by that is if you're blessed to go to bed and you have air conditioning, well, air conditioning here in Texas, I don't know how it is where you are if it gets super cold in the summer, but if you're in a nice home, you've got at least some food in the refrigerator, you have a pillow that you can lay down on, things are well. I believe in the concept of earning that day in and day out.
Yeah.
And so the thought process of doing the math between, okay, if you want to be a multimillionaire, what is the reality of what that looks like, down to the amount of daily calls, doing the math backwards, reverse engineering. But then in this concept of earning your sleep, what step can you take today that at least gets you one step forward in the right direction, right? It's maybe adding people to your database who didn't even know you existed yesterday.
Yeah.
How can they be in your life and how can you bring value to those people? It could be deepening relationships. It could be making more sales. It could be committing a really big goal that will stretch you. Something like that, like the conference, for example.
Yep.
The conference worked out to where I've only been doing the conference planning for about 3 months. So it'll be roughly 4-ish months from wasn't even planning on doing it to we're launching a complete conference with world renowned speakers. And that was because I was sitting and developed this commitment to push me towards something greater. And so every day it's okay, we've got that pushing greater. How can I earn my sleep today? How can I talk to new people and serve new people? And when you start thinking in that, it keeps you in the micro
Yep.
when you can, when you think macro. I'm a big thinker. I can absolutely see a clear trajectory of where I'm going to be pushing towards and big goals and 5 year and all of that. The problem is for people that think really big, sometimes squeezing into the micro can be
Yep.
difficult.
It
And
can
it's
be.
difficult for me. So that's one that keeps my mind in micro steps with macro accountability.
Yeah. Well, and accountability, I mean, you and I have talked about this endlessly, is
Yeah.
the most important thing in no matter what you do. And it doesn't matter if it's in when you're learning, when you're building business, you're scaling business, your relationships, anything. If you are not accountable to the actions that you take, you will fail
Hmm.
at some
Yes.
point along the way, no matter what it is that you're trying
Yes.
to achieve. So
Yes.
you're massively successful, you have a growth mindset. How do you commit to learning every single day? And what's your habits, your daily habits of that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I believe in what I call silent mentorship, which is your ability to be mentored by people that you've never met due to the fact that their content is available online.
Yeah.
So whether it's extra credits through actual structured systems to get in rhythm on new standards, new disciplines, new knowledge, or podcasts or YouTube videos or whatever it may be. Silent mentorship is a huge one. Your ability to reach people like Ed Milet
Yeah.
and that content,
Yeah.
that 15, 20, 30 years ago, you would pay millions and millions of dollars to
Yeah.
get in, just to sit down and get some of that basic knowledge from people like that. So that's a huge one. But the second one is a discipline on each month. I work on something completely new or not completely new, but touching on a discipline maybe that I hadn't worked on in a while if it's not new. So for example, this month, as we're getting closer to the conference, one of the things that I'm doing is going back and refining my message. And so I'm specifically learning from people that have been world renowned speakers, people that have done a lot more of engagements and trained and coached and
Yeah.
finding their rhythms and their vernacular and how they tweak things and speaking with people like Tim Story, speaking with people like your friend and Miss Fripp,
Miss Fripp.
and
Yes.
yes, yes, and learning from these people that have really built amazing lives around bringing clarity and certainty through the verbal articulations of typically complicated subjects. And for in a black and white sense, sometimes it can be sales.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to touch on their sales or their
Yeah.
closing. So it's a discipline and a daily diligence on staying in rhythm, but also we talk about going towards something bigger. something bigger could be, at the end of this month, I need to have more of a mastery around this concept. And then at the end of the year, you go deep on 12 different areas of your life or your business. You've taken massive steps forward in just your professional competency. And there's concepts we can learn every day, not even in a classroom setting, not even in an online setting. There's concepts we can learn every single day just based on our environment. So last October, Brittany, my lovely wife, and I, we were traveling, and we spent a day or two in Nashville, kind of as we were making our way further north. And I went for a walk. And one of the things concepts I took away in Nashville was the importance of embracing your individuality and your unique personality in your business, because Nashville's like the country version of Las Vegas. I mean, it's wacky, right? I mean, there's people singing on the street corner, and one guy looks like Kim Jong-un, another's Donald Trump, and they're like hugging it out on the street corner for pictures. And we've got an Elvis over here, and there's different food, and it's wacky. But the thing is that what drew people to that and what kept people staying, I mean, I would go back an hour or two later, and the same people would still be over in this restaurant or this bar or with this musician. They were drawn to the individuality. And so keeping an open mind to how concepts can play out in your day-to-day, it was a recognition and then the question of, how does my individuality provide a unique, uncommon, positive experience for my client base? And if I can't answer that, they can't either. And that whole mindset that allowed me to go back into my business and restructure and establish and answer those questions that my clients would be asking literally stemmed from a walk through downtown Nashville, that type of thing. So,
and I have to say kudos to you, because many people can see things through, meaning that they can actually handle the action that's required, but many people can't see through things. And there is a difference between the two, and I talk about it quite often. And so, being able to see beyond the obvious is not something that it is something that you can slowly begin to learn how to do, but it is an innate skill that you currently have. And so how do you hone that? How do you, because you are very good at that. You're very good at seeing through things. How do you continue to invest in being able to do that?
Well, again, an actionable point usually starts with questions, because questions need to be answered. And so that was a literal question, but an internal question that we used to go along that path is a recognition that there's something driving everything that you interact with and see on a daily basis. And that driver comes from providing a solution, answering a question, and usually forms from a specific concept or overarching belief. And so if you interact with a company, instead of just engaging in the interaction, start to think a little bit deeper. What are the solutions that they're providing? What are the questions that they're answering? Or what are the beliefs that someone has manifested and created? And this is the physical manifestation of that belief. And your experience usually answers one or two, or if not three of those different questions. So think about, maybe Starbucks. Well, Starbucks, what is their basic fundamental solution? It's just providing coffee, or a good experience. Is providing good food and drink for people that need it, and a good environment for people that want to work. Yeah, that's pretty basic. Then what is the question that they're answering? The question, I believe, could be along the lines of, where is a space where people can feel included? Where is a space where people can have access to, like a remote office that's familiar, that's friendly, that is accessible, that provides the resources that an individual needs to be to come again and again and again and bring their friends, that type of thing. The overarching belief, of course, as we know, not getting political, but Starbucks is a really important belief on inclusion and trying to work with individuals and keeping their doors metaphorically and literally open to all people of all walks of life, business professionals, people that just want to sit down and grab a break. So beliefs of inclusion and certainty and familiarity and familial certainty extends to the services, extends to the outward environment, extends to your purchase. So it's the discipline of just always asking, how do we go a little bit deeper with this client experience, good and bad? Good and bad. You can have the bad side too. Maybe you're a terrible person and you have terrible beliefs and you're discriminatory, and that's still the same question being answered. It's just the negative version. So that's usually how I think, and it takes some practice, but I found it to be extremely helpful.
Thank you. So, but it takes courage to do that, because it takes courage to answer the right questions and to be accepting of the answers, because you might not like what you're going to hear, and that's important too, right? So how do you deal with those challenges when you're faced with something, Evan, that it doesn't necessarily align with your values and your mission and your belief. How do you deal with overcoming that?
That's a really good question, Lisa, because I don't have anything to overcome. See, when there's friction in your life because you encounter something that's
Mm-hmm.
contrary to your belief, the friction starts with your understanding and desire to change that thing
Yeah. Yeah.
instead of working with it. You see, if you believe something, you're hardcore one side, and you speak to someone that's hardcore the other side, outside of an act of God or a life-changing experience, there's very little that can happen through normal conversation, or at least a short conversation, if it's not years and years and
Yeah.
years, that can bring to a middle and eventually cross. And so usually what happens is you start to develop friction and a little bit of protection. But what you're really doing, I believe, when you start protecting, when you start feeling that rise up in you, is you're highlighting a scarcity and uncertainty or a fear in your life.
Mm.
What are you afraid of? Are you afraid of showing the fact that
Yeah.
maybe you're not as strong, or you're not as convicted, or you start to find your own fear instead of allowing that thing to be? If an individual has certain beliefs or a company has certain beliefs, it's not my responsibility to change their beliefs. I believe that if we suspend our right on the last live stream I did with the Obsessed Conference keynote speaker Rocky Garza, one of the
Yeah.
things he talks about, and this will be out on Thursday, by the way, on the Obsessed podcast, that what I'm referencing, what he talks about is, for a moment, if you can just suspend your right to be offended and just listen, grace and space. And
Right.
in grace and space, if you recognize it for what it is, what happens is, number one, you can start to gain an understanding. Because how can you function speaking to someone who believes something differently than you do, which most people do, right?
Yeah.
That's the world we live in.
It's worth
If you don't
living
have a
in.
basic understanding and vernacular for how to carry those conversations through to a point of mutuality instead of friction. And so there's nothing, in my opinion, to actually overcome. It's
Yeah.
okay. Again, why? You believe this, the company believes this is what's going on. Why? What's driving that? Because you start to be solutions driven, finding questions that need to be answered, which is why there's someone or something answering them.
Yeah.
And at the very least, if you don't want to answer them, being aware is important.
Yeah. And awareness is key. And not everybody's aware. And even when it's staring them right in front of their face, they're not necessarily aware of what's, it's kind of, you open the fridge door and you look, try to find the ketchup, and the ketchup's staring you right there, but you can't see the ketchup.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So your next step. So you've got the Obsessed conference coming. What's the next goal for Evan 5 years from now, 3 years from now? Where do you want to take Obsessed? Because and for those of you who are listening right now, it's not being as if obsessed is a bad thing. Obsessed is a very good action to have. It keeps us refined. It keeps us growing. It keeps us in that mindset. It keeps us always wanting to seek more and more knowledge to be better and create impact. And that's what your Obsessed is about. It's not about the negative side of the word.
Yes. Well, and there's negativity associated with every word, but obsessed has
it does.
Some hair on it, right?
Yeah.
Just the concept of obsession. And see, my belief is I started to find the lives of the most impactful people that I had ever met. They were obsessed. They were all in on one thing. And see, I believe that obsession stems from a revelation. Is to get so caught with the cause that you become evangelical about a purpose, and your mission becomes to baptize others in that specific purpose. And you become evangelical and saturate the people in your life in whatever it is that you've caught up in. And so my definition of obsession is more so, how do you live a life that becomes so deeply ingrained with specific giftedness that you have that it becomes impossible to untangle you and your giftedness. I believe if everyone lived a life in accordance with their giftedness, then we would all be living happier, healthier, more productive, more impactful lives, leaving better legacies. And I believe that it's my mission on this earth to help people identify their giftedness and build a structure that equips them to live a life in giftedness instead of one that defaults to their weaknesses. And so when we talk about the 5-year goal, really it's the strategy of, how do I take this message, this vernacular for helping people describe, and some of it's concrete structure, right? I'm a master in sales. I run a $35 million real estate company and a multi-million-dollar coaching company. How do we get from, 7 years ago, I wasn't able to make an $800 apartment rent, to now, we've been blessed with much and we're able to help other people do the same. The anatomy of mastering objections and duplicating your best clients and learning sales, like there's a lot that people need to know in that.
Yeah.
But then it's also the untangible of once you've developed an ability to actually earn and keep and maintain financial stability, now what? How do you, are you really playing in what you're good at, or are you playing in what you're called to do? Because one is there for a specific reason. Another is a purpose that has a divine touch. And where in that life are you playing? And so my 5-year plan really is, I had a goal at the beginning of this year to impact 1 million people in 1,000 days. And that's going to be stretched continuously through this concept of obsessed. We've got the podcast, we've got conferences, I'm booking more speaking engagements, got retreats, abilities like this to impact and improve the lives of other people. But ultimately it would be building my entire life around that specific concept, because a portion of my life still falls into running my real estate business and, the back end day to day, which is
you still need to make
necessary.
a living.
Still need to make a living, and it's necessary, but it's okay. I found what I'm great at doing, which is sales marketing, and what I'm called to be doing, which is helping people identify their giftedness. How do we bridge the gap?
Yeah.
And that transition is where I believe I'll be living for a while, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's moments like this that we can start to bridge that gap.
Yeah. And it's moments like this that you have had failures. Everybody has had failures.
Oh yeah.
And if you're not failing, I really believe if you're not failing, you're not living, and you're definitely not learning. Mm-hmm. So what was the biggest failure that you had, and what lesson was in that failure?
I've had a few pretty significant ones there's not, I guess because a couple of them were on this level, there's not one that's just...
There was not an epic one?
well, I had a couple of epic ones. That's the problem. So,
I actually think that's a great thing to have, because you learn something from there. You learn not what to do next.
It was. I never want to go through it again, but thank God I went through it, so I learned. And early into my career, it was... the concept I had taken away from it was an importance to be yoked with individuals that believe the same things you do, have the same standards of conviction, but then also in a black and white sense, the same drive. I'm going to get up early. I'm going to stay late. I'm going to earn my sleep. I'm driven by specific principles that allow me to work. And then when the job is done is when I'm done, not when I feel like being done.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to work because I must do that, because if I don't, it's a moral and an ethical violation to myself and my commitments and my core values, not because I'm feeling a certain way.
Yeah.
And early into my business, I had built a multi-million-dollar business years and years ago, but I was yoked with individuals that were not business partners they didn't have the same standards of belief, even morality and ethics. And in that mismatch of ethics, we had to disperse pretty rapidly and pretty abruptly, and it was pretty messy. I learned how to set stronger business relationships through just contracts on, okay, if we have a business partnership, how can we disperse in a way that's not so messy? And even last year, I was in a relationship with an individual that, again, things had worked out well, but as we got deeper and deeper and deeper, when people say money changes people, what I believe is if you're not founded in specific convictions, it doesn't change people, but it can distract and give you the power to distract. And you're supposed to be looking this way, but all of a sudden you're looking this way. Well, if you look to the right too long, you're going to hit that wall. And I believe that's what happened in that relationship where that individual was distracted. And so even last year, Lisa, I was in a relationship that cost me $300,000 to $400,000 last year. And that was a pretty important learning experience, because that was an expensive learning experience. But, the very first one, I'd leave those business partners, my life had pretty much fallen apart. I had very little. I was in a very small apartment that I was just about to move out of, and I had to start over. And so I think that, like you said, if you're not failing, you're not growing. I have this belief that if you can recognize the life you were living a year ago, you're not moving fast enough. Yeah. That has positives and negatives attached to it, but it's reinforcing the concept of, if you're in a position right now and somebody asks you, what do you believe? What are your core values? Not some wishy-washy, like, oh, we're going to, phoenix and rise from the ashes. But the core values of, like, be solutions driven, commit first, figure it out later, bounce back with passion. Those types of things on how can you live your life in accordance with specific firewalls that keep people close to you that deserve to be close and push people that don't. Yeah. And the biggest takeaways from all of those were ensuring that the people that actually made their way to a point of impact in my life were people that so tightly aligned with me that I had no doubts or second thoughts on how they were going to interact when things change, financially, professionally, personally, that type of thing.
It's interesting. I have had a lot of interviews with a lot of high level influencers and subject matter experts, and some that have no influence but are very technically skilled as an expert. And consistently, the one thing that when I ask that question, everybody always talks about is a failed business relationship that has taught them and has given them the courage to continue. But what it's done is it's honed their ability to understand their own drives, their own values, their own missions, and to align with other people that think with that same mindset. And that has been a consistent across the board every single time I ask.
Well, and that's huge. It's like a business partnership is a lot like a marriage. God forbid you go through a divorce. You're going to learn a lot about relationships in a really intimate way when you are divorced. Is just a separation.
Yeah.
A divorce of a business partnership or a family or anything like that, it's destructive. There's a lot of emotion attached to it.
Yeah.
But that usually comes through, after that, what usually happens is a more clear understanding because you're forced into reflection. And that's the important thing, is because when you get comfortable, you stop reflecting. If you notice through this entire conversation, I try and think deeply, and we ask questions and I ask why. The reason for that is because when you stop reflecting, when you stop asking questions, when you stop trying to find solutions, you fundamentally start to fall back into complacency, mediocrity. You start to fall back into that comfort, which doesn't actually breed any further success or significance, right? If you're in a relationship, a literal relationship, and you don't talk to your spouse for 3 months, and you don't have that basic level of intimacy and understanding in the relationship, there's a high likelihood you two are not going to be okay by the end of the year, right? Because if you stop moving towards the relationship, by default, you're going to be moving away from it. And that's the same thing in the business partnership. Is there so many people have that as a point of, oh, this is what happened and here's why, because it forces thought and reflection, usually after a period of inconsistency where individuals don't think and reflect as deeply. And so if there's one big takeaway, I just encourage to continue to ask, continue to reflect in your own life, ask those questions why, go back through this and think, what are your core values and your core convictions? And what do you stand by? How do you base your own decisions? How are other companies and individuals basing theirs, and how do they play together? And start really going deep there, because if you can't answer that, that means either, worst of all, they don't exist and you're just kind of basing things off of fleeting emotions, which is not sustainable, or at best, they do exist and you haven't defined it, which means that the relationships you have probably haven't been able to define it either, which means that there could be a situation where you have to restructure some of those relationships, because if you're improperly unioned and you have ununioned growth for too long, that's when people really start to get hurt financially, professionally, personally, all of that.
And I think people too, you have to give yourself permission to say that it's okay, that it's not right for you. It's not the right time. It's, you need to make those decisions in order to move forward, whether it's in the best interest for you or for the other person. Because sometimes it's not in the best interest for you, but it is for that other person. And being able to give yourself permission to recognize that that's okay is a good stepping stone to moving forward.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, Evan, for coming today. And for those of you who want to find Evan, it's Evan C. Stewart at Facebook, correct?
Absolutely. And all my social handles are at Real Evan Stewart, and that's where you can find me. I'm on everything, pretty much.
Yeah, you are. Because I know, because I actually pinged you on everything to get to know you.
Oh,
so.
I know.
Very good. Thank you very much for coming today. And for those of you who are interested in the Obsessed conference, you still have tickets. So, and the address for that, the website address is?
That's obsessedconference.com. And for listeners of this show, if you use my code EVAN, EVAN 19, that'll get you 10% off. So we're sold out of VIP, but we have tons of general admission left. It's an intimate experience. And if you're looking for growth, I think it would be an amazing opportunity for you to attend and level up your network and get more of this just across an even more impactful platform.
Yeah. And I hope to see everybody there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa.
Take care.